Hey folks, I'm Sarah and I'm on the 2025 jury for what I think is the best book prize for literary fiction from small presses. It's called the Republic of Consciousness Prize, United States and Canada, and it is dedicated to literary fiction from small presses in North America. Over the next few months, I will be sharing every single book nominated for the prize, and while I can't share my personal opinions on each book just yet, I will share enough details so that you can get to know the book and the publisher. Every book gets its very own video, and you are not going to want to miss a single one. Next up on the nominee list is book number 23, but again, in no particular order. It's First Kicking, Then Not by Hannah Grieco, and it's published by Stanchion. It's rare that I come across a short story collection where the stories are this connected thematically. So much so that a lot of the stories seemed almost like variations on the same theme, or like the same situations, but with details only ever so slightly changed. There was one point where there was a story where I had to flip back to an earlier story to remind myself, like, are these the same characters we're encountering again? Because the situation was so similar, but the names were changed ever so slightly. It was really disorienting, but also very cool. There's a lot of recurring themes in this collection, including running away from bad marriages. There's several mothers who run away from their families, abandon their children. Their divorce is a big theme. Fertility and infertility is a big theme. Weight gain, depression, discovery or rediscovery of queer sexuality, and just generally a lot of characters who are about to reach or have reached a breaking point, sometimes in very extreme ways. There's a story in here about a woman who is running away from a bad marriage. The person who is helping her run away and get to the place where she needs to go is none other than The Rock. And when I first started reading this story, I thought that it was like something surreal. It was like a surreal story about like a physical rock, that this woman was like being accompanied by a physical rock that was helping her run away. But no. It is The Rock, as in Dwayne Johnson, is helping her escape her marriage. Hannah Grieco is a writer, editor, and teacher in Washington, D.C. She writes a monthly literary column for the Washington City paper and edits prose for a variety of independent presses and literary journals. And Stanchion, the publisher, launched initially as a quarterly zine, and as they say, the tumultuous summer of 2020. And then they expanded to publishing books just in 2022, so not that long ago. They publish poetry, short stories, and novella chapbooks. As a mother and a wife myself, reading stories that are a lot about women who are wives and some of whom are also mothers, or at least there's a discussion of motherhood in the stories, I initially found it really hard to identify with some of the women in these stories who choose to abandon marriages, sometimes even abandon children in like really extreme ways. Some of whom who have very unpleasant husbands, which thankfully is not something I can identify with either, because I have a very pleasant husband. But I am not someone who needs to identify with characters to enjoy a novel or a short story. That has never been something that I have looked for or needed in my reading life. I do not feel the need to identify with characters that I'm reading. So I was not at all bothered by the fact that I wasn't really identifying with any of these, like personally connecting and identifying with a lot of these characters. But it got me thinking a little bit about how people often assume that if a reader shares biographical details with a character, that they're going to identify with that character. So like as a mother, I would automatically identify with the mothers represented here in these stories. And so what I initially, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking, well, I could come here and talk about like pushing against that automatic assumption that we should be identifying with the characters that we share elements of our identity with. And then I started to challenge myself on that just a little bit, because the more I thought about it, the more I began thinking of like the small ways that I might abandon my responsibilities, even if it is temporarily, the small ways I find to escape. So to give one small example that I was reminding myself of as I was thinking about these stories, I have discovered within myself the incredible ability to read a chapter book out loud to my son while thinking about something else entirely. I can completely disconnect my brain from my voice and read on autopilot and be like miles away, a million miles away, just read. Reading the words on the page out loud to him and just be somewhere else entirely. I personally think that is a superpower, but also I would say maybe it's not the thing I'm most proud of as a parent. And I think that is a small moment of escape for me, a small moment of I don't want to use the word abandonment, but I just felt like that somehow connected with some of the experiences these women are exhibiting in these stories in much more dramatic ways, but it felt connected. And then once I realized that connection, I started to see these stories as much more cathartic. Actually, it was like an expression, a big expression of those smaller like desires of escape. That of course sent me down a huge rabbit hole of like questioning what I originally said, which is that I don't feel the need to connect with characters when I'm reading a book. When I realized like, oh, I feel like so much more connected to these stories now that I kind of see I can make that connection between myself and those stories. So make of that what you will, but I do want to ask you, are there any books where you didn't think you could identify with a character at first, especially if perhaps they were doing something a little questionable, making some questionable choices? But the more you thought about it, the more you saw some small reflection of yourself in those characters. Let me know in the comments. This is my example for you. And that's just one of many incredible books nominated by one of many incredible publishers. The long list of 10 books is usually announced in mid-January-ish, but I guarantee you there are going to be more than 10 amazing books from these nominees. So if you love offbeat, under-the-radar literary fiction, you are going to want to follow along. Click above or below for the next nominated book. If I've filmed it, it'll be available there. If not, stay tuned for just a little while longer. And in the meantime, you can click the playlist below that will contain all of the nominated books that I've shared so far. Again, my name is Sarah. Thank you so much for joining me here. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.